thanks to and gratitude to Nest Bharat for, first of all, giving me this opportunity, I think, to share some thoughts on India's foreign policy and how India engages with the world. I'm truly privileged and honored by by your invitation, because I've closely followed some of the conversations that have been happening, and it's an honor for me to be on the same platform as some very esteemed speakers in the past. So I thought, the best way to do this is I look at some of the things that have happened in this domain of foreign policy, which is also very dear to me. It is something that I can endlessly talk about, but I will not do that, and I will limit myself to certain aspects of this subject. So what we can do is, I think, as was also shared with me earlier, we will spend some time looking at various aspects of India's foreign policy, how it has evolved, especially in the last decade, in the last 9 years, and then we will move on to the way forward, and also what we can expect in the times to come. Also, I think maybe if time permits, we can also look at some of our own individual role in the field of foreign policy. So please allow me to just set my timer, because as I said, this is a subject of deep interest to me, and therefore I think it is important that I keep to the time. Please do let me know if I don't. Yes. So, and at any point, if I'm not clear or anything, please do let me know in the chat, and I can see if I can correct my connection or anything like that, because it's been raining here. So first of all, I would like to start by looking at what is it that has changed in terms of big picture for foreign policy in the 9 years. Now, we know that it has been 9 years since Prime Minister Modi took office, and even his most ardent critics will agree that foreign policy has been one of the most popular successes under this government. So why is that the case? I think there are a few ingredients which make for a successful foreign policy, especially by Prime Minister Modi. And I think number one is an uncompromising stance on national security, because with security comes everything else. If you go back and look at, I'm sure some of the earlier speakers and some of your earlier conversations, you might have discussed this, how Chanakya also talks about this when he says that Rajya is what leads to Artha. Artha is what is the foundation for Dharma, right? So at the core, at the very foundation of statecraft is always security, and we see that under Narendra Modi ji, national security has been accorded the top priority, and we'll delve into it a little more in detail. But I just want to, at the outset, highlight a few things. So national security being one of them, but nurturing external partnerships and across different parts of the world and across different domains. Then it is about also leveraging diplomacy for the purpose of development at home. And then also providing leadership in tackling the various global challenges that we face today. And most of all, I feel, is a confident representation of India's civilizational identity. So let us come to each of these one by one. If we look at national security first, the most important change has been that India has finally begun to identify its threats more directly and prominently. And by that I mean reading Pakistan right. For many decades, that did not happen, and there was simultaneous pursuit of different tracks and policies. But today we have a much clearer understanding of what is it in our national security and what is it not in our national security. And to that extent, I think what illustrates this is, I mean, we all know, the attacks that happened in Pulwama and Uri and what happened after that. was basically a response from the Indian side in the form of surgical strikes or airstrikes, which basically conveys that India has zero tolerance towards terrorism. So earlier it was words, today it is actions. And that, I think, is an important change. Now, apart from these, on the ground military kind of changes, there's also a pursuit at the multilateral level where India has been able to mobilize international community for holding Pakistan accountable, right? And the most recent reflection of this was the very public expose of such terrorism at a UN counterterrorism meeting, which was held in Mumbai, where the 26/11 attacks had taken place. So that is, of course, one. But there are other aspects of our national security as well in which there have been some changes. And one of the most important, but often we don't think of this as a national security issue or a foreign policy issue, especially, is also fixing our own internal policies. And in that, I think the most important is the nullification of the provisions of Article 370, which basically existed as a barrier, a mental barrier, which separated Jammu and Kashmir from the rest of Bharat in terms of the mindset, in terms socially, economically, politically, you name it. That was again an important change, because we can always point to external actors exploiting our situation and etc. But if our internal policies are not right, it will always provide others and other players across the world a sort of a opportunity to exploit it. So this again was important. The third thing was regarding our borders. Now, we've spoken about Pakistan, but one of the biggest, if not, in fact, the biggest military threat today that India faces comes from China. We saw what happened in Galwan, which China did not expect. China is very adept in tactics where it will intimidate its opponents. It will try to win without fighting. But when India made a powerful statement in Galwan by actually pushing back China, that was an important inflection point in the way China also looks at India. And as an addition to that, later India also, had captured the Kailash range and etc. So without going too much into detail, the point is that India's pushback against such aggression has been an important, again, signal of our intentions and our uncompromising stance on our national security. Now, India has also linked the state of border to the state of our relations with China. So, which basically means that it cannot be business as usual, just as it cannot be business as usual with Pakistan. If China has to have a strong and a meaningful relationship with India, it has to address the concerns that India has with respect to its aggression on the border. And of course, beyond this, there are certain longer term things also which strengthen our position on the border. Like, for example, there has been a very welcome push for building infrastructure on our borders, which will ultimately benefit our armed forces. Infrastructure that is reliable, that is resilient against different kinds of challenges. So that again has been something that has been a step in the direction of securing our borders. The other thing with respect to national security is the focus that today we see on industrial policies, or more specifically speaking, in terms of the policy language that the Prime Minister has propounded, which is the Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign. Now, Atmanirbhar Bharat is not just an economic sort of a vision, it is also a geopolitical vision. Because today, India is extremely dependent on many other foreign players when it comes to our defense imports. And by embarking upon this vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the Prime Minister is basically trying to boost and build our own defense manufacturing sector. And so far, we have seen results of that. We have seen many of the world's top defense manufacturers responding to this call of Make in India. I come from Telangana, where many such companies have also established their facilities or in the process of establishing facilities. And similarly, many other states of India, for example, Uttar Pradesh has a very robust policy for attracting defense manufacturing. Now, besides this, India, and you can also look at the numbers, for example, today, defense exports, if you just look at that, and I have like a statistic that I can share, 2016 to 2020, and if you compare that with, let's say, 2011 to 2015, it has increased by 226%, the global the defense exports from India. And there are many other examples, in recently you might have come across in the news, India signed deals with Philippines, for example, for supplying BrahMos missiles, and many other such cases. This is something that is unheard of. India has always been an importer, not an exporter. But today we are at least at the beginning of, starting to export such, equipment and, other defense exports. So these have been the various, ways, I think, in which national security has been given a very important priority. Now, but apart from national security, the second set of things that I want to talk about is the strengthening of partnerships that India has undertaken in various regions. And it has done so because of very robust diplomacy, especially with great powers. And we have all seen the most recent visit, for example, of Prime Minister Modi to the United States. And this was basically only the second such state visit, and Modi ji was the first Indian Prime Minister to address the US Congress, which is their parliament, twice. In fact, even in world leaders, he's probably one of the very few who have done that. So, but beyond such ceremonial aspects, which are also important, in terms of actual policy as well, you name it. I mean, the breadth and depth of cooperation that India today has with not just the US, but also many other major great powers, as they are called, is truly very fascinating, because it cuts across, let's say, military cooperation. It has an economic dimension to it. It has a technology dimension to it. And in also places like, let's say, US, Australia, or Europe, there's also a diaspora aspect to it. So we've been able to manage and cultivate relations and strengthen relations with, let's say, the US, Europe, Russia, all at the same time. And beyond the great powers, one area where obviously we have, India has focused very, relentlessly is the neighborhood, our immediate neighborhood, right? You might have come across this term called the neighborhood first policy. What it basically means is that we will have non-reciprocal kind of, and very large-hearted policies towards our neighbors. And this will also be reflected in the kind of diplomatic space that our neighboring countries will have with India. And, some of you might recall in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi actually took office, the first country he visited was actually Bhutan. And you see the number of visits that have happened. It is all reflective of this priority of putting our neighborhood first. And over the last few years, the importance of this is illustrated by the fact that we have been able to sign agreements. For example, the land boundary agreement with Bangladesh in 2015, which was pending for 4 decades. And similarly, today India has almost become the natural first responder whenever a neighboring country is in a crisis, be it like an earthquake, be it any other natural disaster or any other issue, right? So that actions like that is what sort of makes us, it demonstrates the priority of neighborhood first. But when I say neighborhood, obviously it is only the immediate neighborhood, because India also has a very extended neighborhood. And in fact, historically, our neighborhood was never just just the countries immediately in our vicinity. In fact, it is much wider. And that is what, again, India has tried to focus and strengthen its relations. For example, West Asia, right, which has Gulf countries, for example. Today, the level of relations that India has with some of West Asian countries like UAE or even Saudi is at a historical high. We've seen visuals of how the Indian Prime Minister has been awarded some of very important the top civilian and top awards in some of these countries. But it's not just that. India has been able to conclude trade agreements, for example, with UAE. Today, and many other domains which we will discuss in a little while. But just to look at the geographies as of now, West Asia is one. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Nations. In fact, ASEAN countries and ASEAN region is one region which is most familiar with India, and we are most familiar with them. ASEAN, people from ASEAN understand India. In fact, sometimes I feel much more than probably what we understand them. In my own interactions with people from ASEAN, they actually know so much about India that you will be pleasantly surprised. And it almost becomes our duty to actually build on that foundation, that solid foundation that we have with ASEAN countries, because our relationship with ASEAN countries is it's not a thing of decades, not even centuries. It's a millennia-old relationship. Very similarly, is our relationship with countries in the Indian Ocean region, and it is. It's actually so amazing if you read about some of the history in this region. I'm sure some of you might have heard about Sanjeev Sanyalji's book, which is called Ocean of Churn, and I would highly encourage you because there's so much of documented evidence about such interlinked and such deep ties that India has with countries in the Indian Ocean region. In fact, for most part of our history, if we look back, we've been a very maritime country. It is only much recently, maybe the last 100 or 200 years, that we've started thinking more in terms of the hinterland and the land-based ideas. But otherwise, in our history, we've been very much seafaring people. It is also, I'm sure some of you, especially for those of you who come from Odisha, are very familiar with things like Bali Yatra, which commemorate the travel that Indians made to some of the Southeast Asian countries. It used to depend on the monsoons. So these are festivals that are celebrated even today, and something that we really, really need to celebrate and also preserve so that every generation sort of gets to experience them. Similarly, Central Asia has been another important geography where India has been engaging through especially multilateral kind of formats. But more broadly, if you look at the wider region, and when we speak of geopolitics, we have to speak about the idea of Indo-Pacific. I'm sure many of you might have come across it, this idea of Indo-Pacific in the newspapers or in the news. But what exactly is Indo-Pacific? Indo-Pacific is an idea. In fact, it was first propounded by the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, who basically tried to talk about the confluence of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, right? So instead of thinking and imagining our policies and our ideas for, let's say, the Indian Ocean when it comes to India, or let's say the Pacific Ocean when it comes to countries like Japan or Australia, the Indo-Pacific is basically a conscious effort to bring both of these geographies together and to say that what happens in Indian Ocean region has importance and significance for people in the Pacific region and vice versa. So this is what the Indo-Pacific, the idea of Indo-Pacific is. And India has, again, this has become a very important part of India's external engagements, because today countries in this region are speaking about what they call a free and open Indo-Pacific, which basically means that we don't want to allow one country to dominate this region and to disregard rules and norms that everybody else agrees on, right? We all know which country that is, such a an order faces a threat from in this region. So therefore, it is important that India invests in groupings of like-minded countries like the Quad, which you might have come across, and we have been following the meetings of Quad. We see the Quad leaders meeting from time to time, and it is not just about, let's say, military or maritime kind of issues, but it is also about economic issues, technological issues, because these are countries which are trying to create a like-minded space in this region, so that it is indeed free and open in the times to come. Now, if we look, so this is of course the second bucket of things that I wanted to talk about, which is how India is strengthening partnerships across various regions. So we discussed national security, we discussed how India is strengthening its partnerships. The third thing that I want to talk about is also how economic and developmental priorities have also been guiding the way India engages with the world. So, for example, there have been consistent efforts to attract foreign investment, to enable technology transfers, and also to build new economic partnerships like trade agreements, etc. And again, we see the results of this is the kind of numbers we see in FDI inflows. At the same time, how some foreign governments as well as international organizations have extended financing into India's infrastructure projects, and also how India has been able to conclude, like I mentioned earlier, trade deals with countries, let's say, like the UAE or Australia. So clearly, development at home is an important priority for India's foreign policy. So the fourth thing after this that I want to highlight is India's leadership on global challenges. Now, we've all lived through the pandemic. We've seen how even when some of the more developed countries, advanced economies turned their back against the developing world, India was at the forefront of delivering vaccines, but not just vaccines. It was a reliable supplier even of many other medical goods. And in many ways, this was made possible because India itself did a remarkable job at home, because especially in terms of the production of medical goods, because we went from being an importer of PPE kits to being one of the largest exporters. So that obviously helped us to provide for the world. But it is an important contribution that especially stands very much in contrast with how the developed world deal with the challenge. But and similarly, is India's approach in other global challenges like climate change, sustainability, terrorism. In all of these, India has tried to present solutions. Like, for example, the International Solar Alliance is a solution which harnesses solar power. It has encouraged all countries which share and which get abundant sunlight to actually join this initiative and to think about the future, to prepare for the future, right? So even though sometimes India has not been the part of the problem, like, for example, climate change, if you look at the historic emissions, it is the developed world. But yet we have been able to provide solutions, even though we were not part of the problem. And most importantly, I think, like Chandralaji or like one of the earlier speakers mentioned, today, 2023, India obviously has the leadership role of G20, which is basically entrusted with the responsibility to develop and create a collective economic agenda for the world, especially in the face of such challenging geopolitical and economic situations that we see across the world. And India has been able to do that, and has not only done that for itself, but has also prioritized the global south in its policy. So for global south, I understand can be a little bit of a jargon, especially for those of you who are not familiar with international relations kind of vocabulary. But global south basically means roughly can be understood as the developing world. The developing world that includes India, Africa, and many other countries. In fact, Africa has been one of the most important focus areas for us when we are talking about global south, because if you just look at this very interesting figure, India has opened some 25 embassies and consulates in the last 9 years, and 18 of that are in Africa. So that clearly tells you something, and it tells you that India has prioritized global south. And when we speak of India sort of being a provider for the world, or India looking at the world as one family, as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam suggests, it is these actions that make us that demonstrate that kind of a vision. And similarly, at the G20, India has been focusing on the most essential things that we need, especially people in the developing world need, like food and energy security, like climate justice. So these have been what India has been focusing on. Whereas you see countries being so bogged down in conflicts and polarization, etc. For us, these have been our priorities. So that is, I think, what sort of demonstrates the vision of having, looking at the world as one family. Now, we spoke about national security, building partnerships. We spoke about developmental and economic priorities. We also spoke about leadership. But the other thing that I want to speak about is how India has also elevated its what we call soft power and also its global standing. Obviously, whenever we speak of soft power, the first thing that comes to mind is how the Modi government made the world adopt the International Day of for Yoga on 21st of June, and we got like a record 177 countries to co-sponsor it. But it's not just yoga. Ayurveda has been an important pillar of our cultural diplomacy. And for example, last year there was a WHO had established a global center for traditional medicine in Gujarat because of the diplomatic efforts of India. And also today we are also trying to talk about heal, the idea of heal in India, just like make in India. We also need to put the idea of heal in India to the world, so that India is the place where the world looks to heal, and not just heal, but also take important lessons and regarding well-being. So health is so well-being is as important as health, and that is again a message that is very Indian in nature, because just merely looking at healthcare means that we are going to deal with things after they happen, whereas the Indian way of looking at health is also well-being, or a more holistic idea of well-being, which is what we also have and try to showcase at the world stage. We've also seen that culture and civilizational identity has been at the forefront of India's diplomacy and foreign engagements in the recent years. And I think this is a refreshing change from the past decades, where basically governments would shy away and not talk about this, and somehow think that this is not important. But today, at the highest level, the Prime Minister sort of emphasizes this, when he goes to, let's say, countries in our neighborhood or even much beyond. And again, it's not just words. How does it translate to policy? Very simple example, many foreign governments, like from the US to Australia, they have, because of India's diplomatic efforts, facilitated the return of our murtis, which were long lost, or they were either lost, or they were either or stolen. And today, even the diaspora has been an important pillar of how India engages with countries. We remember how Modi ji's speech in Madison Square Gardens, many years ago, pulled crowds, and it does so even today, right? It is because In today's world, people might have a different passport, but in today's world, they are still very much interconnected with their home and their origin and their families in India. And I think that is very important, that India also, reminds our diaspora in different parts of the world that we are here to look out for you, right? The way in which the Indian diaspora is treated in different countries is a parameter for how India engages with countries. And we see that even Islamic countries like, let's say, the UAE and Bahrain have announced the construction of temples in their territories. In fact, in the UAE, it has already been inaugurated as well. And this is a very welcome development for millions of Indian migrants who work in some of these countries. For example, in UAE, it is so interesting that 1/3 of the residents of UAE are Indian. 1/3 of the residents are UAE citizens, and the other 1/3 are migrants from other countries. So you see how important it is and how long overdue it is that people in these countries also get to practice their own day-to-day culture and religion. So and then we also know that when we talk about India's global status, the kind of image that India evokes today is very different from what it evoked, let's say, 1 or 2 decades ago. It's not perfect in many ways; that it is still distorted, but it has been an improvement, an important improvement. The last thing that I want to talk about is in terms of the technology focus in our external partnerships. And I don't want to take too much time, but maybe we can cover it in let's say, if we have any Q&A. But the important point is this, that we know that today the West is in a certain place economically, politically, and to a large part, the reason why the West got ahead is because of industrial revolution, right? When we were under colonial rule. But what industrial revolution did to the West, the question we have to ask ourselves is, can the new age emerging technologies, which people also sort of encapsulate that by in the term called Industry 4.0, could that do the same to us? And could that propel India to the same kind of prosperity that we will need, in every way, which is good for our identity, which is good for our foreign policy and our own people, right? So technology, therefore, is an important focus in external partnerships. And for example, a new division in the Ministry of External Affairs has been formed, which prioritizes technology and which focuses on technology. But we still have a long way to go in terms of integrating our different parts of our society into the policy framework. So in terms of the big changes, I just wanted to highlight some of these changes, but it would be incomplete on my part if I talk about what India has been doing and not talk about the challenges. But I don't. But if I can just quickly also give you an overview of some of the challenges that we are facing. Number one, I think, is in terms of capabilities. I spoke about how China, for example, is the biggest military threat. But matching it and countering it requires an augmentation of our military capabilities. At the same time, we also need to expand our diplomatic core, the number of and the infrastructure that we have for our diplomacy. The second challenge, which I think is also a domestic challenge, but has an importance and bearing on our foreign policy, is also the slowness and some of the inefficiencies in our own bureaucracy and the red tapeism that still persists. So the need for reforming our bureaucracy is not just an economic thing, but it's also a foreign policy issue. The third is, I think, countering the misrepresentations of India globally, be it in media, be it in academia, be it in sometimes domestic politics of certain countries. There are many misrepresentations of India that exist and persist even today. Countering that is an important challenge and an urgent need also on our part. And I believe it's not just the government that has to do. We also have a large role to play in that. And the other thing is also speaking for our civilizational interests. You know, there is that in public policy, lingo, we talk about strategic community in every country. Strategic community is basically the mix of, let's say, military and policy scholars and academicians, etc. So every country has a strategic community, people who focus on foreign policy, security issues, and they are very articulate, they're very vocal, and they will always talk about military interests. Every country also has industry groups like CII or FICI who will always talk about industry interests. But there are always very few people, very few organizations which talk about civilizational interests, which talk about how we have to understand ourselves better. So especially that this is especially relevant for all of us, because we are here in many ways because we care, and we care about nurturing our civilizational identity. And therefore, this again is an important thing that we must emphasize when it comes to foreign policy. It is not enough for us to only accept what the government has said or done, but we also have to articulate and demand what we want to see from the government when it comes to the area of civilizational interests. In what other ways do we want, let's say, the government to articulate our civilizational identity? In what other ways do we want our culture to be at the forefront or at the center of the government's attention? These are things that we will also have to put in front of the government. Then finally, we also need to improve the quality and priorities of our research that happens in our country with respect to international relations. So today we have, you might have heard, there are some universities, there are some organizations which focus on, foreign policy issues, etc. But many a times the topics and the focus of such research centers in many universities is not very much in alignment with the issues that really matter to us. So we have to bring that in alignment with what we really want to know and what we really want to understand through research. And for that, the most important first step is to decolonize our own knowledge production systems. And in that, obviously, the kind of role that, for example, Nest Bharat and organizations like that are playing is extremely important. And I really sort of feel grateful that there are organizations like this who are doing exactly that, who are trying to decolonize our understanding of our own self, our society. They're trying to inculcate the self-confidence that we all need. And I have also personally benefited from such organizations. So I understand the importance of what we are trying to do here. So finally, I think if I can just take a couple of minutes before we break into, let's say, question and answer, I want to also emphasize on what, in fact, I want to continue about what I was going to say about how we as individuals can make a difference in the field of foreign policy. The first thing I think is awareness and advocacy. We have to make ourselves heard on national security and foreign policy issues, because we are a democracy, and in democracy we see the kind of issues that are at the center of political conversations, and rightly so. Of course, the immediate issues, let's say the road outside our home, or or the street light on our street not working, or or more broader issues, let's say, of education, healthcare, are all important and rightly have to be highlighted. But we must not lose sight of the big picture issues as well. Because while there will always be people who will articulate and who will raise issues which are of everyday importance, the larger issues in our collective national interest are sometimes sidelined, or at least not spoken about enough. So it's important for us to always, not just be aware, but also share our understanding with others, so that we make, our foreign policy and national security issues important in the eyes of as many people as we can, because it's not something that naturally comes out in a democracy. And the second and most important thing is that, as I said earlier, we must also articulate the need for foreign policy to reflect our civilizational aspirations, along with, let's say, security and economy. Because security and economic issues will always have their constituencies and the people that will talk about them. But talk about civilizational aspirations and issues is something that only individuals and organizations who think about these issues can do. The second thing I feel is something that I am also very passionate about, is that in today's times, diplomacy is not centralized. Diplomacy is not anymore conducted just by the government alone. Each of us is an ambassador of Bharat. Because today, when we travel outside the country, or we interact with people outside the country, we come across so many misrepresentations about India. It's important for us to present our point of view and to be cultural ambassadors in all our interactions whenever we speak and interact with people outside. And it could be at any stage of your life. It could be during your education. Maybe you could have colleagues who are from different parts of the world, or maybe you travel to places outside of the country. It's important for us to not forget that in today's times, all of us are ambassadors of Bharat. And one of the ways in which we can do it is to build bridges and to build networks, even in our own professional fields, with like-minded people in different countries, and make them more aware about Bharat. And finally, I think it's important to also appreciate the big picture, which is of foreign policy, no matter what field you're working in. Because when you appreciate the big picture, it helps you appreciate your own contributions better. Because you see how the building blocks of what you are working on fits into the larger picture. And that is a great motivation for all of us to contribute and to make some kind of a contribution for Bharat. And it's also, I think, important that by doing all of what we do inside the country is what enables us to do things outside the country. Because internal strength is what enables external engagements. So I think there is a lot that, even though foreign policy is something that we think of it as some kind of a very distant thing that only, let's say, the government is involved in, and something that's not very connected with individuals, the reality, I think, is that individuals and all of us have a very important role to play. And I feel, given the fact that we are a youth heavy population, right? There are more young people today in India than in any part of the world, and the kind of economic potential India has, and with the kind of thriving democracy that we have, and I think most of all the kind of value system that we have, which seeks the well-being of all. We might want to rise at the international stage, but we do not want to be a hegemon. We want to provide leadership. It's a very different thing from some of what the other countries have done in history. All of these are ingredients basically to make Bharat a force for good in the world. And I think that is, again, something that all of our civilization's greatest thought leaders, from Swami Vivekananda to Sri Aurobindo have talked about. And I think that is what we have to always remind ourselves when we talk about India's role in the world. And I want to just end with this quote by Sri Aurobindo. When during our freedom struggle in I think early 1990s, he said, and I quote, that India does not rise as other countries do for self, or when she is strong to trample on the weak. India has always existed for humanity and not for herself. And it is for humanity and not for herself that she must be free. This is the kind of vision that our thought leaders and thinkers have left for us and have left as guidance for us when it comes to conducting our external engagements. So with that, I will conclude, and happy to respond to any questions or listen to comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ji. It has been such an honor to hear from you, Shri Kamal Madishetty Ji. On behalf of Nest Bharat, I extend my gratitude to you for such an illuminating session. I now request Ajay Ji to recite Shanti Mantra, post which we will be dominating the YouTube live of the session.
ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः.
Thank you, Ajay Ji. The floor is now open for Q&A session. Nestlings can drop their messages